Hey guys, today we are starting a brand new unit, unit number 9. So, with your unit 8 books, you can put those away um, in a safe place or put them in your book bag for now because we're moving on to unit 9, which you should have gotten those books probably well over a week ago now in the mail. I also had sent out to you guys the unit 9 math notes. So, today we're going to be looking at 9.1. So, you want to make sure you have your Unit 9.1 notes and your new Unit 9 book handy. If you don't have either of those, pause the video now and go grab them because we're going to be filling in the pages in our book. All right, so let's get started right away. Unit 9, we're going to be talking a lot about decimals, which we have not talked about at all in 4th grade, at all. But just like fractions, decimals belong in the fraction world. Decimal world and fraction world are the same thing. Okay. Very, very different from whole number world. Okay. So before we dive in, I think it's important to review whole number world a bit and talking about place value. Now, this is going back to the very beginning of the school year. So up here at the top, I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit so I can get some space. Okay, so if we're talking about whole number world, we start first with our ones place, right? So our ones place, that would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Goes up to 9, okay? Then we go to our tens place, okay? That would be any two-digit number that exists. So 76, 52, 99, that would be our tens, okay? After our tens, we multiply by 10 again. 10 times 10 would be 100. Now, the 100s are any three-digit number, okay? So 100 is in the 100s place value. 626 is in the 100s place value, all right? So all of those would be, any three-digit number would be considered the hundreds. Now, this would be considered the ones period because after that, it would start to repeat itself because we would have the 1,000 here, then we would have the 10,000 here, and then we would have the 100,000 here. So if you guys remember way back in September, we learned that every three place values repeats itself again for a new period. So it's always ones, tens, hundreds. That's whole number world. Now, fraction decimal world is very, very different. Fraction decimal world is actually, instead of going left, it's going to be going to the right. So we're going to see this guy a lot. This is called a decimal point. Okay. Now the decimal point is smaller than a whole. All right. Just like a fraction is smaller than a whole. So unlike whole number world, where our first place value would be the ones, in decimal world, our first place value would be the tenths, not tens, tenths with the THS at the end. Okay. After our tenths would be our hundredths. Make sure you do it. Let me hear you. Get it. Tenths, hundredths. And then we would have our thousandths, which in 4th grade, we don't really talk about thousandths a whole lot, but it's good for you guys to know for 5th grade. So an easy way to remember this is think of the decimal as a giant boom. So I always, when we're in the class, I'll go boom, and then I'll go Tom heard thunder. So think of that decimal as that loud thunder. So boom, Tom heard thunder. Tom, T, tenths. H, heard, hundredths. TH, thousandths, thunder. Okay, so Tom heard thunder. All right, so that's just a little preview of what's to come. All right, so let me scroll down here and let's read this lesson. So it says, Ty is reading a book about metamorphic rocks. He has read 7/10 of the book. What decimal describes the book of the part Ty has read? All right, so a decimal is a number with one or more digits to the right of the decimal point. So the digits are always going to be to the right. Just like I was saying up top, the digits always go to the right, where in whole number world, they go to the left. You can write tenths and hundredths as fractions or decimals. So right here, it says fractions, shade 7/10 of the model. So let's do that. So I'm going to pick green, all right, and I'm going to shade in, 7/10. That's 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, and 7/10. So this square, guys, represents one whole book. But Ty hasn't read the entire book. He's read 7/10. So how would we write that as a fraction? Well, it kind of gives us the answer right here. Our numerator would be 7, and our denominator would be 10. We would read this as 7/10. All right, now, decimal world, it's a little different. I'm going to change my color here to blue. This chart is showing me place value. Okay, so you'll see here, here's the decimal. Theirs is very tiny. I like a nice, you don't want to make it the whole box, but you want to make it a little bigger than that. So that's the boom. All right, now this guy to the left, that's the whole other world. Okay, that's the ones. That's the whole number world. We're going to actually put 0 in there because has Ty read a whole book? No. It says that he's read 7/10 of the book. So what's our first place value? Tenths. Does everybody see the THS? So what number am I going to put in the tenths? A 7. All right. So as a decimal, we would just read this. As a decimal, we would write it as 0 wholes. Put your decimal point. And then 7/10. Okay, so we read this as 7. And you never want to say 7/10 because that would be 70, right? If you have 7 10 times, that would be 70. So you want to say 7/10. THS. Okay, so that's, you can see they're very similar to those. 7/10 as a fraction, 7/10 as a decimal. All right, so let's scroll down because sometimes we're also going to be able to use number lines to help us with decimals. All right, it says label the number line with decimals that are equivalent to the fractions. Locate the point 7/10. All right, so let's check this out. So I have my number line here, and I see it starts with 0 and 0/10. And then up top, it's 0/10. So these are equivalent. They're both worth nothing. My next one, I have 1/10, the unit fraction. And then down here, I have 0 wholes and 1/10. Now remember, guys, these are equivalent to each other. Fraction and decimals are related. Then I have 2/10 as a fraction, 0 and 2/10 as a decimal. 3/10 as a fraction, and I'm going to put my 3/10 as a decimal. So it would be 0 and 3. All right. For 4/10, I would put 0 and 4. For 5, now remember, I'm trying to locate 7/10. So I'm going to keep going. 5/10, that's equivalent to 1/2. All right. Now, just like in fraction world, the decimal point 5/10, or the decimal 5/10, also equals 1/2. So I'm just filling in each of these decimals as we go. So the next one would be 0 and 6/10. And then finally we have 0 and 7/10. Okay. Now I can fill these other ones in too, just to kind of show the sequence here. 0 and 8/10. 0 and 9/10. Now look what happens when we get to the end here. We have 10/10 as a fraction. Look at our decimal though. To show 10/10 as a decimal, we would simply just say, if I have 10 out of 10 pieces, then I have one whole. All right, so I have one whole number and no decimal. Okay, so we'll say 0 and 7/10 names the same amount as 7/10. So Ty read 7/10 of his book. All right. So the main thing you guys want to know, because this lesson today is just focusing on the tenths. It's really important though to get in your head, boom, Tom heard thunder, because that will help you remember. There's no such thing in decimal world as the oneths. There's just not. All right, it goes by 10 is the first one, and then 100, thousands. Okay. All right. So it says, how can you write 1/10 as a fraction? Explain. Well, this is stuff we already know, right? I would read this as 0 because there's no whole number and 1/10. So how would I write that as a fraction? Well, my numerator would be 1. My denominator would be 10. So I would say the digit, write this down in your book. I'd like to think I'm getting a little bit better with writing with a mouse. It's still not the most perfect for sure. The digit 1 is in the tens place. So because it's in the tens place, that means that when we write it as a fraction, we would just write the denominator as a 10. Okay? So that's pretty much the lesson today, guys. Let's look at the next page because the next page is a little different, but not much. All right, so let's go to the next page. Get my arrow back here. All right. Tara rode her bicycle 1 6/10 miles. What decimal describes how far she rode her bike? So she rode it 1 6/10. Wow. She must be trying to stretch her legs from being inside from all this quarantine. So we've already written the fraction as a decimal. Now we're going to write a mixed number as a decimal because this represents a mixed number. I'm sorry. All right, so 1 6/10. So if I'm using my model here, it says shade 1 6/10. So because I have one hole, I can simply just shade in this entire thing. All right, so that's a whole mile that Tara rode. Now for the second square, I'm going to shade in how much? Well, look at the fraction part. I'm going to shade in 6 out of the 10. So it's 2, 3, 4, 5, and that would be 6. So as a fraction or as a mixed number, we would write that as 1 whole and 6/10. We now want to write that as a decimal. So we're going to use the same place value chart here. Now, this is important for you guys to know. So in the other one we did, we said in our ones place value, we put a 0. But that was because we didn't have one hole completely filled in. How many holes do I have filled in right now? Well, because this entire thing represents 1 whole mile, I would say 1. Here's my decimal. And how many tenths? 1 6/10. Okay, 1 6/10. So how would I write that as a decimal? 1 decimal point 6. Now, we're going to do something that your teachers, including me, have always said not to do. When you are going from whole number world to fraction and decimal world, usually in whole number world, when we read a number, you are not allowed to say the word and. So you would say like 1,286. No and. In decimal world, anytime you see a decimal, we're going to put the word and in there. So how would I read this? Well, I'm going to read the first number first. So it would be 1. And now I have a decimal. And Whoa. Doesn't that feel weird? It feels weird to hear a teacher say it. You guys try it at home. 1 and 6. 1 and 6? Is that the answer? How do we read this? 1 and 6 what? Well, let's look at the place value. Whatever the last place value is in the number with decimals, that's the last word. So whatever that last place value is, that's going to be the last word we say. 1 and 6 tenths. So remember that, guys, because later on when we talk about hundredths, whatever the last, see my STs now are getting mixed up. Whatever the last place value is, that's the last word that we say. So we would read this as 1 and 6 tenths. Okay? All right, same thing on a number line. Label the number line with equivalent mixed numbers and decimals. Locate the point 1 and 6 tenths. All right, so on my number line I have 1 and 0 tenths, which would just be the same as 1. My next one would be 1 and 1 tenth. So I would write that as 1 whole, put my decimal point, and 1 tenth. How do I read that? 1 and 1 tenth. Okay. Next one is 1 2 tenths. So I'd write 1 whole, decimal point, 2 tenths. How do I read it? 1 and 2 tenths. All right. My next one, I'm going in order here. There's my 1 whole. Don't forget your decimal point and your 3 tenths. How do I read that? 1 and 3 tenths. So now they want me to do the next mixed number up here. So I'm just going in order. So since my last numerator was 3, my next one would be 4. So 1 and 4 tenths. How would I write that as a mixed number? 1 decimal point 4. We would read it as 1 and 4 tenths. Okay, let's go to the next mixed number. 1 and 5 tenths. That's a good one because it's the same as 1 and 1 half, right? Half of 10 is 5, so 1 half. 1 and 5 tenths, right? And looks like we're getting to the mixed number they wanted us to talk about, which was 1 and 6 tenths. Okay, so I would put my whole number 1, decimal point, and then the 6. How would I read this? Well, 1 is my whole number. Decimal point, we always read it as and. 1 and 6 tenths. That's the place value that we're ending on. So we can say 1 and 6 tenths names the same amount as 1 and 6 tenths. So Tara rode her bicycle 1 and 6 tenths of a mile. I bet some of you guys have ridden your bikes farther in recent weeks. 1 and 6 tenths is a good ride though, for sure. All right. This one says write 1 as a fraction and as a decimal. All right, so let's do that. So they want us to write the number 1. Now, when they say 1, they're talking about the whole number 1. So how would I write it as a fraction? Well, let's fill in this first. So if I'm filling this guy in, how would I show 1 whole? How much of this would I shade? I'm going to shade in the entire thing because that's going to show me 1 whole is being used. Now, you guys can completely shade the whole thing if you want. I'm just doing this to save some time. So how would I write that as a fraction? Well, since there's 10 longs here, and all 10 of them are shaded in, I could write that as 10 tenths. Okay? Now, how would I write that as a decimal? Well, that's interesting. If I have 10 tenths, that's going to equal 1 whole. So I just write 1 in my ones place, and then what goes in my tenths? 0. Okay, I'm not going to do, some people they want to put a 10 here. That's incorrect. Okay, that's incorrect for the reason being, if I have 10 tenths, guys, then I already know I'm crossing over into this whole new number world. Whole number world here. So whenever I'm talking about that, 10 tenths just automatically equals that 1 whole. So I would write my decimal as 1 decimal and 0 tenths. Now, we don't really ever read it like that. It would just sound silly. Like if you said, yeah, I have a brother who is 1 and 0 tenths years old. That would be really weird. Now, if you had a brother, or if you had a brother who was a year and a half, you might say, I have a brother who's 1 and 6/12 of a year because there's 12 months in 1 year. But that's a whole separate lesson. So let's not get into that. I don't want to confuse us. Your main thing today, though, is to remember this place value chart. Boom, Tom for tenths, heard for hundredths, thunder. And thunder stands for thousands. As you can see, there isn't even a thousandths here because in 4th grade, you don't have to know it. But it's coming. So it's not going to hurt you guys to know that for when you go to 5th grade, which, guess what, is very, very soon. You guys only have a month left of being 4th graders. So let's go to the next page and talk about what I want you guys to do today. Oh, clicking on the wrong stuff. All right. So on page 497, you are going to do, you're going to get some practice today with these. What I want you to do is I want you to do number 4, 5, 6, 7, and that should be good. 4, 5, 6, and 7. All right. So try 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then what I want you to do is take a picture, or you could post it on the flip grid. Today it's either one, picture or flip grid. But you're doing number 4, 5, 6, and 7 on this page. All right, guys. Good luck, and I can't wait to see, and make sure that you either send me a picture or you post it on your flip grid. All right, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your day.